Kyle over here from Honest Charley Garage. We're building the 2013 Street Rodder car. It is a 1951 Ford shoebox. It's sitting on a Fat Man frame, Coker tires and wheels. Richard and Delton's done a lot of metal work to this car. Got the top chopped down low, got the car sitting where we want it to sit. Now it's time to knock out the powertrain. The 2013 Street Rodder car is a 1951 Ford shoebox, a traditional street rodder, old lead sled tail dragger. Ford Racing stepped it up a little bit with their 3.5 liter V6 EcoBoost, 365 horse, around 400 foot-pound of torque. We're matching it with a 6R80 SelectShift transmission so we can get all that horsepower to the ground. First thing we gotta do is we gotta pull this front clip off this car, get the motor and transmission matched up, and then we gotta set it in because we're probably gonna have some issues with the front cross member. The Fat Man set the frame up for a 350 and for a traditional street rod engine, and this is way off beat for traditional. So we got the firewall to deal with, the transmission tunnel, and fabbing everything up, motor mounts and all.
Moving these. Thank you, Fat Man, but no thanks. They're not going to work with this new EcoBoost engine. We're just now figuring out how much we're going to have to take out of our firewall, and the size of this 6R transmission pretty chunky. So we're trying to line up our best cut because we'd like to only cut once. We don't want to cut a bunch of little pieces. We'd rather cut one big one. Be easier down the road.
Yeah, let's cut right to the top of this.
That's right.
That's straight up from the top.
Top of that line. What are you doing? So thanks to Miller Welding, we got some nice plasma cutters. So now we're clearancing our firewall, getting ready to shove this drivetrain in here hopefully. Making one big cut, allow ourselves pretty clearance because we were wanting to smooth our firewall up anyhow. So that'll get us one step ahead. right now we're at the point of where we're dropping a twin turbo V6 motor into our 51 Ford. So obviously this thing didn't come stock, so we're to the point where we're having to fabricate some motor mounts so we can bolt the motor to our chassis. So we've got our pattern made here, we got it transferred to our metal, and we're fixing to build our custom motor mounts. The point we're at, we decided 211 Miller-Matic would probably be good enough to get the job done, but this motor has some serious horsepower and torque, so we're wanting to make sure we get good penetration and just a good strong weld, so we're gonna use the Miller-Matic 212. Great machine, and it's gonna lay down a heavy enough bead and get good penetration to where we never have to worry about any kind of fatigue of our weld, and this car will stay on the road for years and years to come. When you begin fabricating motor mounts, you want to make sure that the metal you're going to use is going to be thick enough to be able to hold all the weight and the stress of this motor. So with this application, we chose to use 5/16, just regular cold rolled steel. Got everything cut out, and now we're to the point of welding it up. One of the key things of making motor mounts is you want to make sure your pieces stay perfectly square and right in place where you want them. We already have our location painted out where it's got to go. So what you want to do, you want to come in here and tack maybe at each corner, because you know, like once you get this cut good and square, that it's going to set square as long as it's tied all the way across. So once you get this spotted in and you start actually running your welds, you're going to want to hold your square, and all throughout you want to keep continuously checking yourself, because it's going to cause you a lot of trouble if it, because when it welds, it'll want to pull to one side or the other, just for the, that's just the nature of the beast when you're dealing with metal and that much heat as the Miller-Matic 212 will throw to it. You can use the magnetic angle. We just choose to use our regular tri-square. Not to say I don't trust that, but trash and stuff can get built up, and if you don't pay attention to what you're doing, you can get off with one of those. So we just choose to use your regular old tri-square. And so we're now ready to start spotting and welding this thing in. Finishing it is a little bit off. It won't be anything that drastic, nothing that a good 3-pound hammer won't straighten back out for you. But if you tried to weld this whole side all at one time, you'll notice that this thing will get pulled way off, and you're might as well just cut it back loose and start again. So that's another little helpful tip for those maybe first time out of the chute. So we'll continue welding this up. Now, one good thing with the Miller-Matic 212, you have the option to use the auto set, which is basically, I've grown accustomed to using that. That saves you a lot of time and a lot of guesswork out of how to adjust your wire speed to your power you're putting out. And it's just a great feature, and I'd say a great selling point for these Miller machines. So you can tell, like if you dial in right here, we had our stuff set on our 18 gauge. Which sounds like our metal is going to be a lot hotter than 18 gauge, but before we started filming this, we got it dialed in, and that's what it was welding the best for what we wanted, a good, pretty weld and good, strong weld. But yeah, those are pretty accurate settings with your auto set. So, but you'll still have to play around with it a little bit, but yeah, it'll cut out a lot of the red tape. All right, so as you can see, there's our motor mount that we'd made over there on the welding table. We had our pattern turned out perfect. It bolted right up to the engine mount on the motor. And for our motor mounts that came to the chassis, we lucked out, got some late 40s model Ford motor mounts from the Honest Charley Speed Shop right off the shelf. And we've adapted it to the chassis and the motor to where we've got a good strong mounting point for the motor. And like I said, the Miller-Matic 212 was the way to go on this application. It gets good penetration, lays down a big, thick, good bead. Because when this motor gets fired up and it's pushing its 400 plus horsepower, it's going to need something pretty substantial to hold on to it. All right, as it came to getting this motor set in the 51 Ford, you're looking at a 2013 EcoBoost V6. A lot different from the flathead that would have came in this car in 51. So we had a lot of clearance issues to begin with, but you know, Delton and Hal here at the shop, they're good. They've shoved many a motors into many a car in their days. So that was a great team to work with. And when we got down to it, trying to get all the clearance we need, we had to come through here. We had to recess our firewall just a little bit because the heads, and you've got a lot of connections, your heater hose, your turbos, a lot of things are coming out towards the back of the engine that we just didn't have enough clearance for to begin with. So once we got that pushed back, got the motor set into place, and you can still see that the motor all the way around is a good snug fit on this Fat Man chassis. But yeah, Delton and Hal, they made it work. We got the engine mounted so far. We're ready to go with that, which carries us back to our drive line. We had to set our the rear of the engine down a little bit to get our clearance for inside the car to make it to the drive, or get our drive shaft back to the rear end, because the way we initially set it up, it had our drive shaft way up in to where we were going to have to build a mega console on the car. We knew we didn't want that. So we finagled around with our motor mounts, our transmission mounts, got us a happy all the way around position. So now we're locked in and we're ready to go start fabricating on the transmission tunnel.
This morning we came in to set the powertrain in this car. Rich and Delton already had a lot of it buttoned up, had a firewall cut out, the floorboard cut out, and we had a little clearance issue with the turbos and exhaust manifold, so we're gonna let Richard and Delton show off some of their skills on making some custom manifolds probably to give us enough clearance for a steering column. So we got the motor set, all of our angles right, and she's ready to go. Fenders in my way, Paul.
Our biggest surprises when we finally got the transmission in, we did not realize just how big and bulky the transmission housing was. And as you can see, we've already started getting our transmission tunnel in place, and that's a big hump. That's a drastic change from the original floor pan in this car. So we're bringing it back. We're going to have to downsize a little bit more, but we've lucked out. And our drive shaft, we're going to run a slip yoke here at the front, a 6-inch slip, to where we don't have to do any kind of fabrication or modification to these hoops running back to the rear end, which that's one of the major challenges that I talked about earlier. Because in a car, you don't want like a huge console in here, so Hal and Delton actually got the transmission low enough to where we're just going to have just enough clearance and avoid any kind of issues later on down the road. So now we're down right now just making patterns. We're wanting to close this up a little bit, and then we're going to want to run a constant shape tunnel all the way back to the rear. And when it's done, it's going to turn out to a slick floor pan. Okay, so once we got inside, started setting our motor, we looked inside the car and realized all of our clearance issues. So basically we just grabbed the bull by the horns, pulled out the Miller 625 Extreme Plasma Cutter, and made us a good clearance. And at first we had thought we wanted to keep the original piece we cut out and try to adapt it back in to allow for our recess. But once we started trying to mock it up, it just looked pretty haggard. So we came in here, made us a new pattern, because we wanted nice rounded edges to match the rest of the body style as it would have came from factory. We continued our beads into our pieces, as you can see, to make it look like it had been here since '51. Threw a couple of beads in here to get a little extra reinforcement there at the flat piece of sheet metal. And we chose to use 18 gauge, which is plenty strong enough. It's actually the factory thickness that they would have put back in these cars back in the 50s. And now we have it tacked into place, exactly, where we want it. We're gonna have to do a little adjustment on the sides and add a few more filler pieces, but that's to be expected with any time you're building any kind of custom firewall and transmission tunnel. It's easy for not necessarily a rookie, but for somebody that doesn't do a whole lot, you can easily get overwhelmed. But just take it one step at a time and one piece at a time, and you'll get to where you want to go.
All right, once Richard and Delton got the firewall cut out with a Millermatic plasma, we pulled the manifolds and the turbos off because we didn't think we were going to have clearance for the motor mounts, for the steering column, for the steering linkage or the pedals. So we went ahead and pulled off the turbos and the manifolds, got the firewall cut out. They've already got it recessed now. Got the motor in, welded in once we got the motor set back in here, we welded in the motor mounts. Got everything squared right where we want it. Went in and put the firewall in, and then we're going to be able to run our stock manifold, we're actually going to be able to run our stock turbo manifolds in the original spots with the steering column and everything in it. So labor intensive, it helped us out a lot where we actually have enough room down in here now to run everything in the stock location. One of the issues we've came across with this car is clearance issues, from the turbo manifolds to fitting the actual engine into the frame and the firewall and the steering column. These motors did not come with a power steering pump mounted on them. They ran electric power steering. So Flaming Rivers actually makes an electric power steering system, which we are going to try to incorporate on this car. But we're actually, like I said, we're running out of room. So we're going to see if we can mock it up and see if we're going to be able to use it, but we're probably going to go with a manual steering. We have manual brakes, coilover springs. This car is going to have a real good solid feel driving it down the road. Don't mean to beat a dead horse, but like I said, we've run into a lot of clearance issues. Richard and Delton cut the firewall out. They have recessed it with this firewall here. They're going in and working on their transmission tunnel. Whenever we first set the transmission and engine in, we had to make sure we had the proper angle on the engine. So when it sat in the car, it wasn't kicked up too high, it wasn't down too low. Not a whole lot of issues with where you put it, except for your oil systems and the way your fuel and air flows through the engine. So once we got the motor mount built, once we got the transmission mount built and the cross member in the car, then Richard and Delton came in and rolled them a transmission tunnel. They got it tacked in right now, so we can come in here and we can try to make the smallest drive shaft tunnel that we can inside this car, so we have a little bit of room. Once we got everything in place, the actual flange of this transmission sits pretty high, so we got our measurements down, we've mocked it all up. Dynatech's going to make us a 3-inch drive shaft with a 6-inch slip yoke, so we can keep the smallest transmission tunnel as we can.
what we have here is, our transmission, once we got our transmission in, we realized how big the housing was. It's going to take a huge tunnel up there that, you know, we barely have enough clearance for all of our shifting linkages, our transmission cooler lines. So we knew we were going to have to start pretty big. But, you know, and really, by the time we come this 3 foot, we're going to have to drastically downsize. So basically, we've just been working on the roller, trying to roll our metal to get us a nice smooth contour and just keep trying to downsize it. And the way the transmission housing took an abrupt turn right here, that's why we're having to make it in so many pieces, because we're wanting to hug it so tight. I mean, we could have made this all in one piece here to eliminate the seam, but then you're looking, it's just going to be way too bulky.
If you made that one piece, it'd have brought this here instead of coming out here. This one piece would have brought it way down here. You'd have been below your tunnel in there.
Yeah, or if you'd have lifted it up, you'd have been way daggum high here. So we had to put a little arch in the back of it to get it, you know, sunk down to follow the transmission housing line as close as we can. And so now we've come to the easy part. We're just going to be a streamline straight back to our floor pan shelf right here that we had to put in to clear all of our differential and everything back in the back.
Well, we'll get this cut down where it's right. Then we'll mark the front of this thing on the outside, and then we'll take it all back out. And we'll get a mark on this and cut it, get it tacked back together, and then get that tacked back in. Then we can set it back in and tack this back to it. And then after that, we're ready to weld up solid. And then we got a filler, make some filler pieces for the sides.
Double check one more time for clearance, and then it'll be ready to go.
Clearance.
Clearance.
Measure twice and cut once. What we did now, we took and cut this 2 inches on this end, 3/4 on this end to get the slope that we needed to work back into our back shelf.
Yeah. I love it when a plan comes together. Where's my cigar? Be like Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Smith, isn't it? 18. So the last time you saw, we had our 3 pieces to our transmission tunnel kind of tacked into place. What we did after that, we went through, marked where the transmission tunnel met our existing floor pan that we had already installed, and basically removed all the 3 pieces, got them cut to fit, dropped them back in, and as you can tell, we kind of got aggressive for our initial cutout for when we were setting in the engine and transmission. But that's no big deal. We still kept our leftover pieces. We just cut what we needed, welded them back in. For this step, we used a Miller 211, and the auto set, we had it set to 18 gauge, and it did a beautiful job. Being that we were working with clean metal, we really didn't have any problem with any kind of porosity or anything, because we were working with good clean stuff. And it welded straight on through. We were actually able to weld about 1.5 inches each time. And it took a minute because there's several feet of weld, as you can see, during all the other pieces that we had. Got them cleaned up. We really weren't too meticulous on the cleanup, being that this is going to have Dynamat and some carpet over it. So we just wanted to get it slick to the touch. And I think it's turned out pretty good. It's looks as close to factory as we possibly could make it, being that how big this 6R80 transmission is. And plus where the linkages and everything hooks up, we had to have a lot of room, which crowded us on our gas pedal, but we believe we've got it dead on to the point to where we're still gonna have room for our accelerator pedal and still have plenty of room between the transmission to hook up our cooler lines and our shift linkage. So if you wanna, we'll lift it up on the rack and we'll get a good shot from underneath. So you can see where we've had to reverse, or not reverse, we had to pretty much refabricate this certain spot for the firewall just to get enough room for our turbos and exhaust to flow through. But once we got there and we had all this cut out, it left us ample room to get in there to piece back together. And so you can tell where we've come through, met up with our original floor pans. And it ended up, we didn't have to cut this lower hoop, being that our slip yoke for our drive shaft downsized right there in that particular area, which kept us from having to do any more fabrication to this Fat Man chassis than we had to. As you can still see, we still have the ears that we had been up earlier in the project for our floor pans before we had the transmission here. So once we pull this body off the frame, we're going to come back and we'll cut all the ears off and get that a nice clean weld like the rest of these are. You can see, well, you can't really see now, but our transmission, we're going to have just enough clearance to run our hose lines and our linkage. To have just enough clearance to run our linkage and our cooler lines without causing any conflict, because when we first sat in here, we were thinking, wow, this 6R80 transmission is huge, and how are we ever going to make it work and not have to do a whole lot of reconfiguration with our accelerator pedal and brake pedals, because we're already running out of a lot of room here on the driver's side compartment. But yeah, I believe we've found a happy medium, and we're quite pleased with the way it's turned out so far.
All right, as you can tell, once they got the firewall fitted and tacked into place, we ended up pulling the motor back out so we can weld it all in and get it prettied up in here. A lot of things we had to consider were the exhaust, the turbos, the oil cooler lines, your transmission cooler lines, your shift linkages, your electrical wiring harness that goes to a transmission. So there's come to a lot to consider whenever we went in here, and Delton and Richard recessed this firewall, made us enough clearance for all that stuff. Then after we got all that buttoned up, Richard and Delton came in here and laid out the transmission tunnel and the drive shaft tunnel to finish out the floorboard. So as soon as Richard and Delton ended up getting the firewall roughed in, I went in and pulled the engine and transmission out of the way. One thing they had to consider was the turbos, the exhaust, the oil cooler lines, the transmission, the electrical, the steering column. There's a lot of stuff that has to go in right in here. So once we got all that figured out, snatched the motor out of it, then they came in, welded it in, cleaned it up, and then they one-off fabbed this beautiful transmission tunnel and drive shaft tunnel. I mean, it really cleaned the car up and sturdied up the entire car. We're running really short on time here on this 51 Ford shoebox. Richard and Delton just got the vent windows cut. Now they're on the trunk, and trunk latch is smoothing it out, so we gotta go. I gotta do my editing because Richard back there acting like a Hal over here from Honest Charley Garage. Behind me we have the it's a 2013 street runner car. 6R80. You ready? Yep. Yeah, 6R80. Oh, all right, 6R80. I got.
You got it.
I stuttered. First thing we gotta do is pull the front clip, and then we're gonna map. Dadgum. I need a Richard Martyr pose. So, I don't even remember what I said. What? It's a real good thing. Just add another one, cut it in half.
Yeah, we choose to use the your regular travel. So we took the what's the name of that plasma cutter? Then we went with electric. Then we went with our electric. What the hell would you call that switch? But right now we've got to get over here and put in the rest of the doors
We're running really short on time here at Honest Charley Garage on this I love Richard. Richard is my boy.
So we got our cover slicked up, which will give us a nice finishing touch. Keep our actuators saved and concealed, and we got to get the hell out of here and go back to work on the door.
Jason always likes making bloopers of Hal Everett. All right.